Welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders in business, life, and all points in between. A special afternoon session to accommodate my friend in New Zealand, Chris Valli, who's joining us today. We're going to talk about Beyond the Story, courage, leadership, and the power of human connection. Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Morning, Greg. My pleasure. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, happy tomorrow. How are what anything I gotta look forward to? It's 9 a.m. in New Zealand and 4 p.m. here in Madison, Wisconsin.
I've always struggled with that time zone thing. The fact that we're
Yeah.
the future. It's always
Yeah.
been something that hasn't really sat comfortably. But we'll flip the narrative and say that the future looks bright.
Okay. That's beautiful. Good to know. I'm looking forward to it now. I'll rest easy tonight. So Chris, Chris is a New Zealand journalist. He's a keynote speaker and the author of Put the Phone Away, um, and the New Zealand location host of Stories That Stir New Zealand. He is also the founder of the VOIC framework, which is Vulnerability Opens Inner Courage. And I think that's why I connected with Chris on LinkedIn. I saw he had a post about men, especially in vulnerability and emotional intelligence. And I thought, man, kindred spirits. So, Chris, why don't we jump in here and let's start out about talk a little bit about some of your background and what's led you to this point in your career.
So look, I grew up in Dunedin, which is of Scottish heritage. The translation for Dunedin is known as Edinburgh of the South. Good Scottish ancestry in the bottom of the South Island, New Zealand. Youngest of seven children, including triplets. We were a Catholic family growing up, so the church and sport was always within our proximity. Um, School wasn't really my thing. I was too often playing sport out of the classroom, wanting to go on trips and activities to pursue all things sport, cricket, rugby. Um, but I had trained as a journalist when I left school. Was lucky to get a cadetship or an apprenticeship at the local newspaper, and loved the idea of being a rugby commentator or being the guy that got to talk about the All Blacks 24/7, the national rugby team. So that for me was the goal. Was lucky to do that, and then did 4 years overseas, America and the UK, and came back with a sense of what do I do now. Had done a few things, and I met a partner who was early childhood kindergarten, and we lived in Queenstown at the time, which is the home of bungee jumping here in New Zealand. And long story short, got involved with teaching and trained as a primary school teacher with a Bachelor of Education through the Otago University. So it all seems quite far removed now and a few haircuts ago. But just love telling stories. And yeah, I guess looking back now, the power of storytelling.
Yeah, so okay, I've got a Scot and a Kiwi here. So this is like a double whammy on the accent, but it bear with me, my friend, as I'm used to subtitles on my Netflix, but I think I'll do my best to stay afloat. Um, let's talk a little bit about just some of these conversations you've been having and is this on a podcast or some of the are you interviewing people? Tell me about these conversations and what are they like?
So the podcast got set up a few months ago. It's called the Voice Podcast, which stands for Vulnerability Opens Inner Courage. It came off the back of my own personal experience. Yeah, how do you surmise that in a couple of minutes? But in 2019, I took a cell phone off a student. I transitioned from primary teaching to secondary. At the time, my marriage was in a pretty low ebb. My mental health was at rock bottom. It was during this time that I was heavily involved with musical theatre and was consumed by the busyness of life. So, to answer your question, my personal experience was taking the cell phone off the student. The school at the time didn't have any behavioural policies or consistency around that. That incident got documented. It got sent to the governing body here in New Zealand, the New Zealand Teachers Council, in March 2020. Actually, sorry, January 2020, before COVID. I got an email confirming that I was under investigation, that I'd broken the code of conduct. And what transpired was many things, but ultimately it led me to where I am now, and that is taking the mask off, advocating that it's about reframing what masculinity looks like. In New Zealand and Australia, Greg, we have this perception that to be stoic, to be staunch, that we have to turn up or have all the answers or have the sense of I'm tough. I truly believe that real toughness comes from putting your hand up and saying, I don't have all the answers. I'm stuck. I need help. I'm sad. I'm angry. I'm happy. And the ability to articulate those emotions. So, yeah, look, my story is fairly complex. And so the podcast has come off the back of my book, which is called Put the Phone Away. It got picked up by a London publisher last year, and it's been a wonderful 12 months.
So put the phone away is referring to that incident and what happened off of that.
In all honesty, it is, but it should have been called something else. It should have been called. It should have been called "Get the F Out of My Classroom." I didn't have a toolbox. I didn't know how to deal with defiant students. I didn't know how to have an honest conversation with my wife. I didn't know how to care for students that were doing it tough at home. I didn't understand what courage looked like. So it was a bigger picture. It wasn't just around screen time. And what I've learned the past 12 months, especially, is that vulnerability, which is a Latin word and translates to vulnus, is about having the courage. And courage comes from uncomfortable conversations. And so it's an uncomfortable conversation. You know, the book, Teacher Investigation, people have their own perception around what they might look like. So I decided to tell my truths and to have the ability to go, this is what I went through. And I've never been more proud. So, yeah.
Good for you. I'm sure that that felt good to write it, to get it out there. Did you learn some things about yourself as you were writing the book?
Yeah, yeah, there were many. I think primarily that I just wasn't honest. So during that time frame, Greg, into 18, with the ex-wife, we moved into the in-laws while we built a home. During that time, I lost my sense of independence, my identity, my contribution to the relationship. We had a young daughter at the time. Um, the love languages, what that looked like, shared interests, physical touch. And so, what did I learn? I learned that I wasn't honest. Um, I was unfaithful during my marriage. And in 2019, which was a hell of a year, um, my wife found out about that. And it's something that I'll take to my grave. Her reaction, her face, the one that I thought I loved, the one that I knew I loved, and yet I hurt her. And that's been um, consuming, and hurt is a beast. And when someone is hurt, that's not a quick fix, and that requires a lot of healing. So I've healed. I hope that she's healed. We've got a wonderful daughter from that process. And what have I learned? That we actually learn from our greatest failures, that we learn from our mistakes, that when we really, really stuff up, that's when we start to find out who we are.
It's very true. Um, going through some of that a bit on my own right now. And I think one of the things, like my wife said, is, at some point you have to learn how to forgive yourself. And have you got to that point yet, Chris? Or are you did you get to a point where you thought, yeah, I'm a human being, and you know, it's time to move on and forgive myself?
Yeah, I have, and I think that's come from living by myself after separation. Those uncomfortable moments where it's those quiet moments when you're living in your own headspace, and that's why musical theatre became such a great escape, because I had that social interaction and that community and that feeling of collaboration, critical thinking. But ultimately, I have forgiven myself because I'm not defending being unfaithful, but I understand when you're not on the same page, or the alignment isn't there, or the values aren't there, and there's no honesty or co-construction or adapting to the needs within a relationship, then it's not meant to be. And so, yeah, I have. I've done a lot of work around what we call in New Zealand. There's a Māori holistic health model here called Te Whare Tapawha, which is the 4 dimensions of health: mental, spiritual, physical health. And it links to the wharenui, which is known as the marae, or the meeting house for Māori custom. So in Māori culture, the marae, the wharenui, is the meeting house for local iwi, which is like a tribe and people come together. And so those 4 dimensions are about getting off the couch. It's about moving. It's about exercise. It's about connection with your spirituality, going for walks on the beach, jumping in cold water, climbing mountains, and living life. And so, as a teacher, I often got consumed by the curriculum, consumed by meetings about meetings, being on the screen 24/7. And it's about relationships, it's about action. And so, to answer your question, yeah, I think I have. It's times when you go, oh shit, I wish I didn't do what I did. But I read a quote recently from Ozzy Osbourne, the late Ozzy Osbourne, saying that if he'd never done what he did, he wouldn't have been Ozzy. And there's something in that we go through life with these experiences, they ask questions. And how do you define leadership? Leadership comes from a team analogy. You need good people around you, you need proximity, um, and you need an alignment that is my beliefs, my values, your beliefs, and how we bring that together.
I think what's really important here is that the name of this show and the title for this is Beyond the Story. And you go through three things. You just mentioned leadership, but you also talked about courage. And I think what I see is the irony here is, especially with men, um, it's considered courageous if you're the tough guy. You know, you're the sporting event. You're standing in the rain. In your short sleeves. You're going through all the elements, or you're taking a hit on the whether it's rugby or football out here, and you get up, you lift a lot, you're strong, you can out muscle somebody. But boy, the courage I see was like, do you have the courage to be in the room when a loved one is dying? Do you have the courage to reach out to somebody who is hurting and really suffering, and help them and talk to them? And then do you have the courage to open up like you've just been doing, Chris? What do you think's holding men back from showing that kind of courage?
Cultural or social norms that when they grew up, they had parents or grandparents that had a certain way of acknowledging or addressing what it means to be human based on their own experiences. I think they're struggling because they haven't been modeled that hasn't been shown the modeling component of having the courage is about action, and that action is by doing. And so many years ago, when my mum took her last breath and mum died from bowel cancer, she had the courage to stay on to wait for me. And to provide context there, I was working as a tour guide, taking American clients on adventure trips around the lower South Island. And we heard that mum was on her last legs with her bowel cancer diagnosis. And I expected to get back to mum thinking that she was no longer. But I heard that she was on her last legs. And she had the courage to hold on for me to arrive. And I'll never forget Greg turning up, seeing mum, a bag of bones. She was Irish background, staunch, quite short, buxom lady, had lost a lot of weight. And it was a real privilege in hindsight to know that mum had the courage to hold on to wait for her youngest to be there, which gave me this reflection on courage is intrinsic, but courage has to be promoted extrinsically. And it's got to be modeled by blokes, men, males who show that the manosphere is a load of bullshit. Really? We don't treat women like that. We pick up on those teachable moments around that's not appropriate, or we go, no, let's reframe the narrative. So, to answer your question, I think it's around modeling. And so, I've tried to do that with my own daughter. I've tried to have age appropriate conversations around how I hurt mum, what relationships look like. That's a difficult conversation, but it's one that needs to happen. And ultimately, I'm now a male role model for my daughter. Pros and cons that come with that. She's influenced by what she sees online. So, how do we have those honest conversations around courage and also around dad's mistakes?
Let's talk a little bit about get back to the stories and why the storytelling is so important, why it builds trust and influence and cultures. And I think the storytelling is kind of how you share that, not on the modeling. I mean, obviously the modeling the day to day, but it's how you relate, you pass along that modeling. But tell me a little bit about why storytelling is so important.
Well, can I ask that question of you? Can I ask that same question to you?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah,
I think the storytelling is a way for you, especially if it's a difficult experience, to make a connection with somebody, to demonstrate to them that you're willing to share something that's difficult. You have to tell the right story too, right? You know, I I think I was talking to Chris before this show, and I told him that I had interviewed somebody for a book, and that I asked him about his childhood, and he shared something very personal about a learning disability that he had never shared with anybody. That was really courageous. Um, and I think telling that story rather than blustering about some business accomplishments really built some trust up and some respect from me for him. And I think, um, I was on a podcast yesterday talking to somebody about this. It's almost like you build up your own authority by being vulnerable, because they're going to accept your accomplishments, the things beyond the tough times, the good times. They're going to be more credible because you're a real person. You're human. You've got foibles, you've got challenges. So that's why, to me, the storytelling in storytelling about moments of weakness and struggles is so important for your credibility and your overall authority.
100%. And I love that you've articulated that from an American lens. A president over there who is not displaying empathy. And you asked the question around what it means, storytelling. It becomes reciprocal, it becomes an understanding, it becomes knowledge. And ultimately, I think empathy is the key word. When you can relate to a person's experience, it creates not only connection and belonging, but it creates empowerment. And when you sit with somebody at a coffee shop and you've got their physicality and there's no phones and it's face to face, someone's talking, someone's listening, doing a lot of this. We need to listen to understand, not listen to give feedback. I truly believe that we're quick to give an opinion. We don't always need to have an answer. Holding space, storytelling is about listening. And I liken it to when I grew up, and my first ever book that I really got into was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. C.S. Lewis. What a wonderful narrative. The imagination of going into a wardrobe in this magical world of Narnia and Turkish delights, and being compelled by hearing my teachers read that story, or having a tangible product and getting lost in that, and going, the beauty of the theatre and the beauty of storytelling. And I think screen usage has taken away from our ability to be curious. We're curious in other ways because we want to get likes and notifications or compare ourselves to what people are doing. That's not storytelling. That's another conversation, I guess. But I think storytelling has an impact, um, which is, I guess, the reason why I'm here today in terms of what's happened the past few months.
Well, I appreciate you telling us your story. Um, let's talk a little bit about purpose and legacy. Um, you've interviewed a lot of people in New Zealand. And what are some of your takeaways from those conversations about purpose and legacy?
It's a great question, Greg. Um, I think sometimes we as a collective, males, females, husbands, wives, we're often defined by our role, our title. Spoke to an All Black selector back in 95, 96, the late Gordon Hunter, who died from cancer. He was a police detective. And when I first met him, he had a dodgy eye, and it was quite intimidating talking to him because you try to make eye contact in his lazy eye, or there wasn't a sense of where do I look type thing. And so, legacy and purpose is about family. And Gordy made the comment, Gordon Hunter, that even though he's defined by being a police detective, and he turns up to an incident, and he's got to go through that process, he says he becomes Gordon when he goes home and he makes a cup of tea with his wife, or they come back to being a couple, because that's the reason why he's a cop or a detective, is because he gets that support back home, or that sense of what keeps them honest. And so we've got one chance at life, and we get so caught up in the busyness. Oh, I'm so busy. It's great to be busy, or I haven't got the time. We've always got the time. We've got to make the time. We've actually got to say, you know what? I'm going to give you my time. And I think through mum's death, through my experiences, through interviewing a wide range of people, when you sit and the purpose becomes around the why is often coming back to values. What are your beliefs? Who are you? Why are you here? And often it doesn't happen until you make all those mistakes. You get the mortgage, you get the white picket fence, you get the kids, and then you go, oh, now I get it. I've got my health. I can have a beer, and that beer tastes so good, but I'm going to go to bed early because I don't need to have lots of beers anymore to make perspective around what's important. It's about health. It's about loved ones. It's about connection. It's about crying. I think blokes don't cry anymore. Why aren't we crying? Why aren't we saying, "Oh, I'm naked. I'm struggling. I need a hug. I love you. I need you. I hear you." It's almost like you're not supposed to. A load of bullshit. There's a thing behind me here. You probably can see it. It's an outline of the New Zealand map: South Island, North Island. New Zealand translates to Aotearoa, which is the Māori word for land of the long white cloud. We've got to get out. We've got to see the country. We've got to see different cultures, different perspectives, different experiences. When we do, we become fuller. We become grateful, and we have a different perspective.
Chris, let me ask you, when you do get out, you do engage, you do connect with people, I've found that you get more in the moment, and it feels like the moment is the only place where empathy and all these things that you're talking about, emotional intelligence, can really be practiced. And I guess what I mean by that is I don't think there's any real manual out there to be empathetic. It just has to occur if you're in the moment. Have you had similar experiences like that? Do you feel like now, with this greater sense of empathy and EQ, that you're more in the moment and that you're striving to be more in the moment than you ever were before?
Yeah, and I am, because of lived experience. Becoming a teacher was my identity. I made a choice in 2019, and that choice was to be Superman, to be reactive as opposed to proactive. And losing my identity as a teacher was about starting again. Starting again is hard, but when you hold space and you're in the moment, as you talk about, it's it's powerful because you're connecting. It's such an overused word: connecting, belonging. You jump on LinkedIn, and you go, "Oh, this person's got 12,000 contacts," or you might get 10,000 views or impressions. That's not connection. That's not
Yeah.
belonging. And so the irony here, talking to you today, Greg, we've never met. I'm opening up to a bloke that I can only see on a screen. Um, it's very organic. It's very authentic. It's very compelling when you hold space because you've had a lived experience. And I always remember Mum used to always say, "Oh, my father used to say," or her mother used to say, and I'd sit there going, "Oh, Mum, it just seemed like garbage or gobbledygook around understanding her metaphors or her lived experiences because I was a kid." Then you become an adult and you have those lived experiences and you go, "Oh, now I know what Mum was talking about. I get it. The penny drops." And in my book, there's a song from Ed Sheeran called, oh, it's a lyric basically, the ability to call heaven. And, wouldn't it be great if we just got on the phone and say, "G'day, Mum, Chris here. Look, I'm really struggling today. Do you have any advice?" And so that's why we've got to say, "I love you." That's why we've got to say, "I'm sorry," because tomorrow is not determined. So we've got to be present in what we have. We've got to be committed to what we have. And we've just got to be really honest.
Chris, when you give your keynotes, what's your message? What are you talking to people about?
I've asked that question internally a lot the past year. Is it about honesty? Is it about vulnerability, which translates to open wound? It's an interesting concept: vulnerability, open wound. Is it about courage? Is it about teacher burnout? Is it about being present? I think what I've learned off the back of the past 6 months is that it's around taking off the mask, metaphorically and literally, that real masculinity. And let me, I'm just looking up here on the wall, my vision statement for the voice framework to redefine masculinity by normalizing vulnerability, activating courageous conversations, and building emotionally connected men, families, and communities.
Yeah.
We need to change the narrative, and we have to do that by normalizing vulnerability as a superpower, as a strength. And Brene Brown talks about, not having the aptitude to share straight away because that's off-putting for a lot of people and that's
Yeah.
uncomfortable. It's about creating a rapport, which leads to a relationship. And once you have shared interests, then you start to feel, I can trust that person, I can confide in that person, and I feel comfortable doing that. And so when you start to create that relationship and it's reciprocal, I think that's when vulnerability becomes almost tangible without people knowing. And so that's why we need good friends. And those that support us are the ones that support us through our good times and our bad times. And in recent years, actually last year, I had auditioned for a show, a musical theatre show. And the creative team were told not to cast me. So to provide context there, I've been involved in musical theatre for 15 years, Mamma Mia, Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables,
Wow.
great, wonderful experiences. And in March 2025, the headline came out after my teacher investigation, and the headline read, aggressive teacher who bullied students struck off. The creative team didn't cast me off the back of that. I auditioned for the show. There was no honest conversation. I heard behind closed doors that because they were a brand or they had a link to advertising and revenue and marketing, that putting the guy that was part of their community for 10, 15 years into that show after that headline was just too uncomfortable. But they never had the courage or the honesty to talk to me about it. And that hurt. That really hurt because I thought that was my family. I thought that
Mm.
was my community. I thought that was my emotional attachment. So that was a lot of learning around what it means to be honest. So the guy that was unfaithful in his marriage, the guy that hurt his wife, that's the growth. That's the pain. And that's the message that I'm trying to send when I stand on stage. It's not about people clapping. It's not about giving me a hug because my story is no longer my story. My story is a framework, but more importantly, a co-pupper, a journey, a pathway, an action into men going, shit, I need to be honest. I need to get rid of this weight that's on my shoulders and talk about it and own it. Accountability.
Wow. Well, you've been very honest with us today and very courageous, Chris. And I am totally rooting for you. And anything I do to bring the voice to the States and promote it here, I'm more than happy to do it. I think I honestly, I really believe this. I think it's kind of at the root of so many of our societal problems. I really honestly believe a lot of the men in power and a lot of the men just there's no empathy, there's no EQ, and it's not sustainable. It's not. It doesn't promote growth, um, financial, uh, mental, physical. It's a dead end street, and we got to change. And I just think it is the key. It's at the root of so many of our problems. So I applaud you, my friend, and keep it going.
Look, if you know Brene Brown, I'd love to be at her table, metaphorically and literally, and um, inspired by a lady that's done so much research around what that looks like in leadership at a high performance sport level. A lady that grew up in Texas and was told by her own parents, this is how you do what you do. And she critiqued that. That's a
Yeah,
beautiful thing. We've got to be critical thinkers. We've got to be curious. We've got to be inquisitive. And, a year ago, I'd never heard of her. I've read all her books now. Daring Greatly is a wonderful title. We have to dare, we have to be great, and we've got to lean into the uncomfortable. Because if we're not leaning into the uncomfortable, there's no growth and there's no purpose and there's no belief. Um, and I guess in finishing, I met a lady called Vicky. I'll give her a shout out, Vicky Tyler. I met her at a keynote boot camp about a year ago in terms of what it means to be a keynote public speaker of influence. And she had this ability to be empathetic just by listening. There was an aura about her. And I wanted to give her a hug as soon as I met her. I just knew. You just get a gut feeling.
Yeah.
She's now written the foreword to my next book. I've got a book coming out called Man Enough to Be Seen, which breaks down all that stuff that we've talked about. And she sent me a quote recently, and I've just got it here on the computer, and it's this one here. Chris is a compelling storyteller and a brave voice in a conversation the world desperately needs to be having. I don't know if I am a compelling storyteller. I'm just a bloke wanting to take off the mask, needed to take off the mask. And Greg, if I get an opportunity, mate, to get to the States, and the last time I was there was 20 odd years ago, after doing summer camps, don't be surprised if you get a knock on the door and it's a weird speaking Kiwi saying, "Can I stay the night?" I'd love that.
Guest room is open, my friend, anytime. We'd love to have you here. Um, Chris, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to wrap up here. So the folks here in the States can go eat dinner and you can get on with your day. But once again, thank you so much for joining me on Thought Leaders Live. This was a special episode.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Hang on, Chris, for just a second. Appreciate you being with us for another edition of Thought Leaders Live. We'll catch you on the next one.